History is not always about the truth. It's about who tells the best story at times. And in the Tudor court, in the times of Henry VIII, the king himself was not the best storyteller. It was his right hand man, Thomas Cromwell. There was this intense strategic partnership between the king's wife, Anne Boleyn, and Thomas Cromwell, his chief minister. Anne had been crowned Queen of England with the full endorsement of Thomas Cromwell. They were the most effective political team of the 1530s, but they were also a volatile alliance that eventually imploded. So the question is, how does this partnership that is so vital to the king's government turn into a deadly rivalry almost overnight? At first, Anne and Cromwell were an incredibly effective team. They were almost like the architects of the era. Anne was noble by birth, Cromwell was a commoner. He was a blacksmith's son. But despite that massive class divide, they were locked together by mutual respect for the other's capabilities. Anne was sharp, visible at court, and knew how to navigate the king. Cromwell, on the other hand, was an administrative genius, and he could turn her ideas into law. They were, simply put, the ultimate allies. They needed one another as they shared a common vision for the Reformation and for England, but also for the security of one another during a tumultuous time. When they began dissolving the monasteries, they had completely different visions for the future and wanted that wealth to fund charity, schools, and hospitals, and to fulfill the role the monasteries played in their communities. Cromwell, however, was a pragmatist. He knew that the king's coffers were empty and he knew where the money needed to go in order to serve Henry, their most capricious king. Now, this is where things got a little bit murky for Anne because if she had been smart, she wouldn't have disagreed with Cromwell publicly. Anne didn't just disagree behind closed doors, she openly challenged him. She even had a sermon preached in front of Cromwell, warning against vile advisers. She was publicly calling him a danger to the king. And Cromwell, he didn't take that lying down. Once Cromwell realized that Anne had become a liability, he started building new bridges right away. And the first thing he did was approach one of Anne's lady in waiting from the Seymour family. So there's always this question of how much Cromwell contributed to this whole story because sometimes it would look like Henry just wanted out of the marriage. He was frustrated that Anne hadn't given him a son. He likely asked his advisors, how do I get out of this? And Cromwell, who was always one step ahead, did not just facilitate the divorce, he orchestrated an annihilation. It is said that Cromwell actually bragged to the imperial ambassador that he essentially dreamed up the case against the queen. He didn't just accuse her of a simple affair, he accused her of adultery with 5 men. Why go to such extreme, far fetched lengths? Because he knew that the charges had to be shocking to be effective. He layered in accusations of incest and witchcraft along with adultery that served a specific purpose. It made Henry look like the innocent victim who had been manipulated the whole time. Anne, who had always been a misfit in the English court, was seen just as an outsider. someone who brought in radical foreign ideas from her time in France that unsettled the traditional English nobility. She was constantly isolated, and Cromwell, who had been watching her like a hawk, saw this mounting tension that she faced on all fronts. He realized her position was weakening and he had to strike. What Cromwell saw in Jane Seymour was not just an opportunity because the king was already eyeing her. He saw an opportunity to insult Anne. While the exact details of how he manipulated that connection remains in the shadow, it is clear he used this proximity against the queen. Now, Cromwell had created a narrative of pure depravity. It painted Anne not just as a failed queen, but as a dangerous force that had to be purged. And it transformed Henry from a man who was simply changing his mind into someone who was wronged and who had to finally unmask a threat to his own kingdom. All of this was engineered by Cromwell, of course, and Anne was arrested. She was lodged in the Tower of London and she was executed on these false charges on May 19th, 1536.
Apportez l'épée!
But here is the final irony. Cromwell had become so arrogant in his own abilities to manipulate anyone in court that he failed to see his own precarious position. He thought he was playing a game of intellect, but the nobility was actually playing a game of blood. They had actually never truly accepted him. To them, he was always just the blacksmith's son. Anne, despite all the rumors, was still a noble born girl, and when his usefulness ended, the aristocracy, they didn't hesitate and they annihilated him. The man who orchestrated the downfall of one of England's most formidable queen consorts was dragged into the very same apartments in the Tower of London that had once held her. He was executed just as mercilessly as the people he had sent there himself on July 28, 1540, just 4 years from the death of Anne Boleyn. In the end, Cromwell died just the way Anne did. He had no way to defend himself. It was sudden, brutal, and completely unfair. He died not because he was guilty of the things he was accused of, but because he forgot where he had come from. In a society obsessed with bloodlines, Cromwell was a commoner, and he should have never tried to play the game of kings.